This is the best book that I've read this year. It's one of the best books that I've ever read. And in this video, it's my mission to convince you to read this book as well. If you've already read it, then, I guess it's my mission to make you nod your head and go, yeah, he's right. Welcome to Paperback Journeys, where today I'm going to be talking about Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. This book won the Pulitzer Prize in 1986, and the thing about this book is that if I saw it on a shelf and I knew nothing about it, there's pretty much a 0% chance that I ever would have picked it up. I don't really like the Western genre that much, but I do like really well-developed characters, and this book, maybe more than any other, has introduced me to characters who felt as though they were in the room with me while I was reading. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite characters. I'm going to talk about what I loved so much about the way that Larry McMurtry tells a story in this kind of immersive way. And I'm going to tell you why I think that this is the story of America. One version of America anyway. And also, listen to this accent. You can trust me. I'm like an authority on America. Lonesome Dove is the story of two men, Augustus McCrae and Woodrow F. Call, two former Texas Rangers who have settled into this kind of quiet, if somewhat monotonous life in the small, dusty town of Lonesome Dove, Texas. Gus is this kind of charming, witty, somewhat lazy man who enjoys the finer pleasures of life. He likes good liquor, he likes poker and conversations with good friends about philosophy. And then you've got Woodrow Call, who pretty much is the exact opposite. He is the strong, silent type. He's much more what you might be used to if you watch Clint Eastwood, kind of westerns. He's that kind of guy. He's a disciplined leader. He's driven by a strong sense of responsibility for his men that all live on the ranch. When we first meet these two, they're basically like an old married couple. They've been tied together for decades, and seeing them sort of rub each other the wrong way is, in my opinion, one of the most fun aspects of the book. You can tell that Woodrow is just so sick of Gus at this point, and yet he is his best friend in the world. It seems like all of their adventuring days are behind them, but then things take a turn when their old friend Jake Spoon shows up. By the way, I'm going to tell you the premise of this book. I'm not going to go into detail about the plot or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about spoilers or anything. Anyway, their friend Jake Spoon shows up, and he tells them that he has seen the uncharted wilderness of Montana. And this sort of creates a spark in Woodrow, who decides that they've got one last adventure in them. And they decide that they're going to travel across the country from Texas to Montana on this epic cattle drive with a bunch of renegades and misfits. That's basically what this story is. It's about a group of ranchers traveling across a vast and untamed landscape as they face the kind of like treacherous weather, insane nature, outlaws, and the kind of like ghosts of their own past, and they always feel as though they're gaining on them. It always feels as though the ghosts are, it's like a dark cloud that's over them for the whole journey, and it's getting closer and closer. It kind of has that eerie feeling to it. There's plenty of action in this book, but in my opinion, the beauty of the story is in the quiet moments when the characters are all sharing a meal, and that's when the book really delves deep into the inner lives of its characters, revealing their dreams and their regrets and the bonds that kind of hold them together. And these are they're really human moments, when slowly these characters who appear so rugged and calloused against the hard world that they live in, they sort of open up. And we find out who they are. I mentioned Gus McCrae already, and honestly, I think this guy might be one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. He's just incredible. I can't wait for you to meet this guy. On the surface, Gus seems like He kind of seems like the sort of guy that's all about enjoying life, having a good time. He's got this sharp sense of humor that makes him the life of the party, He's the sort of bloke that's going to be cracking jokes at the wake of a funeral, to kind of lift the mood. But beneath all of that, he is really quite philosophical. He spends a lot of time thinking about the big questions. He thinks about his life and his past and what impact he was supposed to have, and did he really achieve the things he was supposed to do. It's almost as though, and you find this with a lot of funny people, maybe people in your own life, it's like his humor is a way of like covering up these deeper thoughts and putting some distance between him and the others so he doesn't appear too vulnerable, And, while it might seem like he's lazy and he's kind of carefree, he's kind of got that laissez-faire attitude, when he's called upon to act, he's the first one to step forward and is actually very capable. Another great character is Lorena Wood. She is a prostitute working in a bar called the Dry Bean. And I think Lorena is interesting because she never feels as though she's defined by her profession. She's a prostitute in a time where, this kind of employment was a lot more common than it is today. And although men can rent her services, she never gives them permission to fully own her, This is a boundary that she makes really clear to the frustration of all the men around her. She's endured this lifetime of hardship. And what truly defines Lorena, I think, is her kind of pragmatic approach to the circumstances that she finds herself in. She has a plan for her life, she knows what she wants, and she is going to get it. In a world that's really dominated by men, she has just been dealt a bad hand, but she's learned to play the game well. Then you've got Roscoe Brown, a deputy who just has a complete lack of experience to the point where he's almost childlike. He fumbles around for most of the book. He's kind of stumbling from one misadventure to another. He's always out of his depth, but he's motivated, you can tell, by a genuine desire to do the right thing, which kind of makes all of his efforts much more charming and endearing. He's trying to do the right thing, but is he capable of it? Maybe not. His kind of attempts to navigate situations that are clearly beyond him are very funny. I was laughing out loud at some point, and you just can't help but root for the guy. Some of the funniest moments I've read this year have come from the scenes with Roscoe Brown in them. I would read a whole book just about Roscoe Brown. And honestly, I could make a whole video just about the characters in Lonesome Dove. There's so much depth and variety to each one. But if I'm being honest, part of the magic of Lonesome Dove is discovering these characters for yourself and, just spending time with them. What really blows me away is how vivid and fully realized each one of these characters feel. When you read this book, you will feel almost like a silent companion as you journey across America. McMurtry writes with so much empathy, and I think that one of the ways he's able to kind of do this is through his use of third-person omniscient perspective. And this is something that usually bothers me, that kind of head-hopping between different characters and it's not clear whose perspective it's coming from. Usually I find that so annoying, and it can make me feel as though I'm a little bit detached or even overwhelmed by the stories jumping between characters' thoughts and perspectives. But McMurtry has this unique way of making it feel so natural. Instead of feeling jarring, the shifts in perspective kind of flow seamlessly. It's almost as if you're in the conversation and you're looking from one person talking and then you're looking from another person talking, and you can kind of sense what they're thinking and what they're feeling, Usually like I say, when a writer has this omniscient perspective, it feels a little bit lazy, but in Lonesome Dove, it feels intentional and it lets us get inside the heads of all of the characters all at once. I think another reason that Larry McMurtry writes so well about life on the ranch is because he was actually raised on one. He grew up on a little spot known as Idiot Ranch. Mate, how good is that? Like, I was raised on Idiot Ranch. That could be straight from a book, couldn't it? Unfortunately, unlike his siblings who seemed to take to ranch life pretty naturally, one of his sisters even became like a rodeo queen. Larry had some unusual fears for a kid growing up in that environment. He was afraid of shrubbery, he was afraid of chickens, and he always felt like a bit of an outsider from the rest of the family. You know, he's a bit more of a bookish kid. Maybe some of us can relate to that. But one of the things that Larry McMurtry loved about growing up on the ranch is listening to his dad and his uncles sit around on the porch of an evening, kind of talking about their glory days. All of these men were kind of, the quintessential cowboy types. And they'd sit around and talk about how the country was changing and they were becoming relics of another time, which would have been absolutely true for the time that Larry McMurtry was being raised, kind of between that Civil War era and the industrial age in America, when, like rugged individualism is being left behind and America just isn't sure what it's about to become. They don't know the superpower that they are about to be. I think the biggest theme in the book is really about that. It's about the death of the Old West. And it kind of reminded me of a little bit of Moby Dick. The way that Captain Ahab is pursuing the white whale, the characters in Lonesome Dove, particularly Woodrow F. Cole, are driven by a need to cling on to the fading ideals of the Old West, even as they chase after something that's already sort of slipping away. He's a man who's built his life around the codes and the values of the frontier, hard work, duty, the love of nature. For example, sometimes he goes out and walks in the country and he just wants to listen to the wind and the sound of America. When he decides to embark on this cattle drive to Montana, it's really more than just a journey. It's a last-ditch effort to recapture the glory of a bygone era. He kind of embodies the desperate pursuit of a world that no longer exists. And that really seems to be a feeling that a lot of the characters are aware of. Some of them feel sad about it. They feel as though they're becoming obsolete, while other characters are excited, about what the future holds. It seems like this is now going to be the land of opportunity. One last thing I'll say as well, that's a little bit strange, and I think maybe some people might find it a little bit unsettling, especially for a book that's written with so much empathy. The characters that are Native American in Lonesome Dove are kind of presented as the other. They never feel as though they've got their own perspective, while everyone else seems to have their own perspective. And yeah, like I say, that's kind of unusual because Larry McMurtry, from what I could tell, just has this deep understanding of human nature. And he brings that to life in his portrayal of various characters from different races and different backgrounds. There's an African-American character. There's some Irish immigrants that have just come over. And obviously you've got the cowboys. And I think he writes quite well from the perspective of Lorena as well. He's very empathetic to her plight. Yet, when it comes to the Native American characters, there is a noticeable distance. They kind of exist largely in the background. They're these menacing figures that are really just serving as another obstacle for the ranchers. They're quite terrifying in the book. And I know that some people didn't like this aspect of the book, which is understandable, I think. But I'll say this as well, in defense of this, I think that it's likely that Larry McMurtry chose to present the Native Americans in this way because it authentically reflects how the ranchers would have viewed them at this point in history, right? To these characters, Native Americans were often seen as the other. They are mysterious and almost mythological. They're the boogeyman, you know? So I think that's the reason that they're presented in this way. I do think that that's intentional. Much in the same way that, you know, if you imagine a story told from the perspective of Native Americans, that would have the ranchers as kind of crazy, drunken intruders and aggressors, which, you know, would have been accurate from their point of view. Okay, so let me give my ratings for the book. So let's start with the plot. I'm going to give the plot 3.5 stars. And you might go, well, that's not very good. You know, this is your favorite book of the year. This is definitely more of a character-driven book, right? That's the strength of the book. The plot is quite simple. It's the depth of character that really makes this the best thing that I've read this year. And so therefore, characters, 5 stars. Easy 5 stars. Augustus McCrae alone would have been worth 5 stars because I just, man, I wish that I hadn't read this book already. Honestly, it's one of those books I wish I could just, boop, you know, reset, just read it again because, man, hanging out with Augustus McCrae was fantastic. There are other books, actually. There's prequels to this book, which talks about some of their younger days. But, you know, I'm definitely going to get around to reading them. If not this year, then very early next year. Anyway, yeah, so the characters, 5 stars, definitely. Setting, also 5 stars. The terrain that they have to cross, the dangers that they face, the quiet moments, sitting around a campfire, everything. It's the closest you can get to nature, you know, without going outside, because, you know, who wants to go outside, you know? No, honestly, this did make me want to go on a camping trip. It's been years since I've been camping. I was like, mate, me and my wife, we got to go on a camping trip. This is amazing. Okay, next up, originality. I'm going to say 3 stars. But again, this is a character-driven book, you know? So it's all about the characters. And overall, I'm going to give Lonesome Dove, of course, 5 stars. It's the best book that I've read this year, probably top 3 that I've ever read, and I hope that you read it as well if you haven't already. After I read and enjoyed this book so much, a lot of people have recommended that I should also read Blood Meridian, which I'll be reading and reviewing soon, and if you'd like to see that review, then you can click up here. Thanks so much for watching this video, I really appreciate it, and as always, happy reading. Seriously, you gotta read this book.